We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph and Meseches Megillah. This is Megillah Daf 31a. The Mishnah continues that on public fast days we lane from the brachos uklalos. We read the brachos and the klalos. Rashi over here says brachos uklalos the im bechukosai, the ones in bechukosai. Lahodia shal iske hached ba poranos. The idea is to let it be known that it's because of sin the punishment comes. They're fasting, of course, again because they want the rain to come, because of various punishments that they want to go away. So we want to let people know punishments happen because of sin. Ba poranos laolam. That's why the punishments come to the world. V'yachzru b'tshuva. That way they'll do tshuva. V'yinatzlu mitzara shehein misanal. And then they'll be saved from whatever affliction that they're fasting regarding. And the Mishnah continues, Ein mafsikin b'klalos. We don't stop in middle of the klalos, as Rashi over here says, Ein mafsikin b'klalos. Ken mefarish milsa she'ein shnayim korin b'hen. Elo echad. You don't divide it up into two aliyahs. You just have one aliyah for the klalos. Echad koreas kulan. One person reads them all. Ushnayim harishonim korin parshas brachos. The first two aliyahs, they read the parsha of the brachos. The last aliyah reads the entire klalos. That's what it means. Ein mafsikin b'klalos elo echad koreas kulan. You don't interrupt in the klalos. One person is called to the Torah for the aliyah to read the entire thing. B'sheni uv'chamishi b'Shabbos mincha. On Monday and Thursday and Shabbos and mincha, Koren Kesidron we read according to the order of the Parshas HaShavua. Rashi over here says Koren Kesidron b'inyan Seder HaParshios, according to the Seder of the Parshios. U'tanai pligi ba b'brayso b'Gemara hechon maschil b'sheni uv'chamishi. The Tanaim will argue in a brayso in the Gemara where exactly we begin when it comes to Mondays and Thursdays, but in any case we read from the Parshas HaShavua. Ve'in olim lahem min ha'cheshbon, and it doesn't count towards the calculation, meaning you don't say that what you lane on Monday, now you go further on Thursday, and then on Shabbos you pick up where you left off. You don't say that. The point is that when Shabbos comes, you repeat exactly the same thing that you laned at Shabbos Mincha, and on Monday and Thursday, you repeat the same thing. And the Mishnah concludes, Shanamar, like the Pasuk says, Moshe spoke the holidays of Hashem to Bnei Yisrael. The idea is there's a mitzvah to read from the Torah things that are relevant to that particular holiday. Rashi says, Akula mas nisan koi. This last part of the Mishnah bringing the pasuk is going on the whole Mishnah. The idea is that there's a mitzvah to read from the Torah having to do with the holiday on every particular holiday. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, B'Pesach, Koren, B'Parshas Moados. On Pesach, we read the parsha of the holidays. Umaftirin B'Pesach Gilgal. And the Haftorah is Pesach Gilgal. That's from Sefer Yehoshua. Now Rashi over here says, Braisa Shleimahi Aru Shar Kol Yemos HaChag, Koren B'Karbonos HaChag. This entire thing is a big Braisa, goes through all the various holidays till Sukkot, about the Karbonos of Sukkot. Ela Shabale HaGemara Afsikua. But what you're going to see over here is that the Bali HaGemara, they interrupt the Braisa at various points. Lefarish b'chol moed yom biyom matiknu achrim shenagu lasos beis yomim likros biyom sheni. Because the Gemara wants to explain what do you do in Chutz La'aretz, where there's 2 days of Yontif, what do you read on the second day? So that's why the Gemara keeps interrupting the Braisa. Lefisha Braisa nishnis be'Eretz Yisrael, because this Braisa was taught in Eretz Yisrael. Sheinosim Yontif el yom yomecha, because in Eretz Yisrael it's just 1 day of Yontif, and so that's why the Gemara is going to keep interrupting this Braisa, as we're going to see right now. The Gemara says v'ha'idna nowadays. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, the Iko Trei Yume, where we have 2 days of Pesach. So Yom Makama b'Pesach Gilgal. So the first day you do the Haftorah Pesach Gilgal. Ulamachar b'Pesach Yoshio. And then the next day, second day of Pesach, you talk about the Karban Pesach in the times of Yoshio. Ushar Yemos HaPesach. Now the rest of the days of Pesach, Melaket v'Korei Men Yonoshal Pesach. You collect and you read from the various topics that have to do with Pesach. And Rashi over here says, Ushar Kol Yemos HaPesach Siman Mapo. The Gemara is about to say there's an acronym for the days of Pesach. What does that stand for? Mishchu ukachu lachem tzon. That's the parsha you read on the first day over there. Im kesaf talves ami. That's what the aleph stands for. Psol lecha. That's the pay. Vayedaber shebebahaloscha. V'yom tev sheni korn kiyom rishon. Now on the second day of Yontif, because we're talking here starting from Chol HaMoed. On the second day of Yontif, it's the identical reading that you do on the first day. Shor o kesef. That's the parsha of Shor o kesef. So that's what the Gemara over here says. You read Mein Yonoshal Pesach Maihi. What is Mein Yonoshal Pesach that you're reading for the days of Chol HaMoed? Reb Papa says Mapo. Again, the acronym we just said, Mem Aleph Pei Vav. Siman, that's the acronym, that's the way to remember. Yom Tov Ha'achron Shal Pesach. Now, on the very last day of Pesach, what do you read? Koren Vayhi B'Shalach. You read from B'Shalach. Rashi over here says, Lefisha B'Yom Zayin Shal Pesach, Amru Shira Al Hayom, because it was on the 7th day of Pesach that they said the Shiras Hayom. Umaftirin, and then the Haftorah is Vayedaber David. That's Vayedaber David. Rashi over here says, Shehi Shira Kamosa. That's also a section of Shira in Sefer Shmuel, similar to Az Yashir. Umedaber Bam Yitzias Mitzrayim. It talks about Yitzias Mitzrayim, Allah Hashem Biapo, Veishlach Chetzio Vayifitzeim. So therefore we read from that Haftorah. Ulamachar, and then the next day, because again there's 2 days of Yontif in Chutz La'aretz, you read Kol HaBechor, Umaftirin Od Hayom, you read Kol HaBechor and you do the Haftorah from Od Hayom. Od Hayom is in Sefer Yeshayahu. Rashi over here says Od Hayom Lefi Shema Poloso Shel Sancherev Belel Pesach Chaya. This is discussing the downfall of Sancherev, and the downfall of Sancherev happened on Pesach. That's why we read from this particular section. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya, Abaya says, V'idna nowadays, no galmul lemikri, the custom is to read, and the Gemara again brings a mnemonic to remember it. This is a mnemonic phrase, Meshach Torah Kadesh Bechaspa Psol B'madbara Sholach Buchra. Literally it means pull the bull or the ox and sanctify with money and hew in the wilderness and send the firstborn. And again, each word is a reference to the laning of that particular day. As the Mesoras Hashas over here explains, V'hem Simone Roshei Parshios, that's the way to remember the beginning of each Parsha. Dahainu Yom Rishon Mishchu Ukachu, Yom Beis Shor Okesev, Yom Gimel Kadesh Li Kol Bechor, Yom Dalet Kesef Talve, Yom Hei Psol Lecha, Yom Vav B'madbara, Dahainu Vayedaber, B'midbar Sinai, Vayasu B'nei Yisrael Sapesach, B'yom Zayin Parshas B'shalach, B'yom Ches Bichra, Kol HaBechor Asher Yivoled. Again, that's the various parshas that you read on all the 8 days of Pesach. The Gemara continues, Ba'atzeres on Shavuos, Shiva Shavuos, you read from Shiva Shavuos, that's in Sefer Devarim, Umaftirin B'Chabakuk, and the Haftorah is going to be Chabakuk. Rashi over here says, Umaftirin B'Chabakuk, Shemedaber B'Matan Torah, Elomi Teman Yavo B'Matan Torah. The Haftorah over there talks about, in Chabakuk, talks about Matan Torah, relevant to Shavuos. Acherim Omrim, there are others that say B'Chodesh HaShlishi, you read the parsha of B'Chodesh HaShlishi, that's in Sefer Shemos, Umaftirin B'Merkava, and the Haftorah is by the Maisa Merkava, that's in Sefer Yecheskel. Rashi over here says, B'Merkava the Yecheskel al Shem Shenigla B'Sinai, B'Ribo Rivavos al Peishonan. Yecheskel over there is talking about the revelation at Har Sinai, and again, so that's why it's relevant to Shavuos. And the Gemara now interrupts again, V'idna nowadays the Ika Trei Yome, where there's 2 days of Yontif. So Avdinam Ketarvaya, we actually do both of them, the Ibcha, but we actually reverse it. In other words, we just mentioned 2 sections, we reverse the 2 sections. Rashi over here says, V'idna Dika Trei Yome Avdinam Ketarvaya v'Ibcha de Ko'amri Acherim, the Inhu Basrai, the Acherim who were later, they said the L'Tanakama B'Chodesh HaShlishi. They said B'Chodesh HaShlishi, after B'Merkava, and after it was Merkava, Bayom HaRishon Karilu. So that we actually read on the first day. We read B'Chodesh HaShlishi. U'Dukamar Tanakama B'Atzer Shiva Shavuos, and that which the Tanakama said, he said to read Shiva Shavuos, Umaftirin B'Chabakuk, and after it's Chabakuk, Korin and B'Yom HaSheni, that we do on the second day. V'Ibcha, we basically reverse what we just said. Why? The Matan Torah b'Shishi b'Sivan. The reason is because Matan Torah itself was on the 6th day of Sivan, so we want to make sure we reference Matan Torah specifically on the 6th day of Sivan. So we start with B'Chodesh HaShlishi, that's on the first day of Yontif, that we do on the 6th day of Sivan when the Torah was actually given. The Brisa continues, B'Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Hashanah, B'Chodesh HaShvi, we lay in B'Chodesh HaShvi, that's in Sefer Bamidbar, Umaftirin Haben Yakar li Ephraim, the Haftorah is Haben Yakar li Ephraim. Some people say V'Hashem Pakad Esora, you lay in V'Hashem Pakad Esora on Rosh Hashanah, Umaftirin B'Chana, and the Haftorah is from Sefer Shmuel about Chana, V'Idna D'ika Trei Yome, and nowadays again that there's 2 days, so Yom HaKama Ki Yesh Omrim, so then on the first day we do the Yesh Omrim, we do V'Hashem Pakad Esora, and then L'Mocher, and then the next day V'Elokim Niso Es Avraham, we lay in from the Akedah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tested Avram, Umaftirin Haben Yakir, and we do the Haftorah from Haben Yakir. B'Yom HaKippurim, on Yom HaKippurim, Koran Achrei Mos, we lay in Achrei Mos, Umaftirin Kicho Amar Rom V'Nisa, we do the Haftorah from Yeshayahu, Kicho Amar Rom V'Nisa, Uvemincha Koran Ba'arayas. On Yom HaKippurim and Mincha, we read the Parsha of Arayas, the Parsha that has to do with illicit relationships, Umaftirin B'Yona, and the Haftorah is Sefer Yona. And Rashi over here says, Haben Yakar li Ephraim, Mishum Zocher Es Kerenu, Rachem Arachamenu. On Rosh Hashanah, we read this section because it talks about that Hashem should remember us, have mercy on us, Maftirin B'Chana, and then we do the Haftorah of Chana. This is also talking about on Rosh Hashanah, Lefisha Pegidasa Haisa Rosh Hashanah. She was remembered on Rosh Hashanah for a child. The Akedas Yitzchak, and why Akedas Yitzchak and Maskir, we mentioned that. Kadesha Tizchor Lanu Hayom B'Mishpat, that again HaKadosh Baruch Hu should remember us for a good judgment. Kicho Amar Ram V'Nisa, we learn Kicho Amar Ram V'Nisa. That's the Haftorah for Yom HaKippurim. V'Yamar Solu Shemedaber B'Midas Teshuva, talks about Teshuva, relevant to Yom Kippur. Halos at Somev Chareyo, that's in Yeshayahu. Koren Ba'arayos, and then we read Arayas when it comes to Mincha on Yom HaKippurim. Shemish Sheyesh Averos Biyadu Yifrosh Mi, and the idea is you should separate for any Averos you have. Lafisha Harayos Avera Mitsuya Shenafsha Shaladam Mechamdasan V'Yitzro Tokfo. When it comes to Arayos, that's an Avera that's very common because of the fact that there's a Yetzer Hara person wants to engage in that particular kind of avera. And the Gemara continues. Amar Rav Yochanan says, Kol makom she'ata motze gevuraso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Anytime you find the might of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ata motzi anvas nusa. You also find the humility of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Davar zeh kaseh b'Torah v'shanim b'Neviim u'meshulish b'Chsuvim. This idea we find in the Torah, in the Neviim, and in the Chsuvim. Kaseh b'Torah, we find it in the Torah as follows. It says in the pasuk, Ki Hashem Elokeichem hu Elokehu Elokim v'Adonehu Adonim. It talks about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the master, the Lord of all gods. Uchsiv basrei, but it says after that, Osem Mishpat Yosom v'Almana. He does the judgment of the orphan and the widow. So that's the idea. It talks about how powerful the Gevura of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then it talks about the humility of HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps the orphan and the widow. Shonim b'Neviim, we find it in the Neviim as well. Ko Amar Ram v'Nisa Shochin Ad v'Kadosh, talks about the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ram v'Nisa, exalted. Uchsiv basrein, it says after that, V'Yazdako Shval Ruach. It talks about the fact again, the person who's lowly, the person who's humble. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there for those who are low. Mishulish b'Chsuvim, and then it's repeated again a third time in the Ksuvim. T'chsiv, like the pasuk says, Solu l'roche b'aravos b'kosh shemo. Also talking about the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is up on high, is exalted. Uchsiv basrein, what does it say after? Avi Yisomim v'dayan almanos. It talks about the fact he's the father of the orphans and the judge of the widows. All the same basic idea. And the Brisa continues, Yontiv Harishon Shel Chag, on the first day of Yontiv, of Sukkot, Korin b'Parshas Moados, Shabatoras Kohanim, we read in Sefer Vayikra about the holidays, Umaftirin, and then the Haftorah is, Hinei Yom Bola Hashem. Hinei Yom Bola Hashem, that's in Zechariah. Rashi over here says, Hinei Yom Bola Hashem Dechsiv Bei Lochog Es Chag HaSukkos. It talks about Chag HaSukkos explicitly in that section. And the Gemara says, V'o'inna, and what about nowadays? The Ika Treyomi, we have 2 days of Sukkot in the beginning of Sukkot. So the Gemara says, Lamachar, the next day, meaning the second day of Sukkot, Mikra Hachanami Karinan. We read the exact same thing. The same section we read the first day, we read the second day of Sukkot. Afture my maftir. And what is the Haftorah? Vayikwalu ela Melech Shlomo. So they read the section when they gathered by Melech Shlomo. This is in Sefer Malachim. Rashi says, Vayikwalu al Shem Shachanukas Habayis. This was the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash. Haisa ba'osa asifa v'chag HaSukkos. It took place at this gathering. It took place on the Chag HaSukkos. That's why we read that particular section. Ushar kol yemos hachag. Now, the rest of the days of Sukkot, Korn b'karbonos hachag. We read about the various karbonos of Sukkot relevant to each particular day. And the Brisa continues, Yom Tov v'achron, on the last day of Yom Tov of Sukkot, Korn kol ha'bechor. We read the section of the Torah kol ha'bechor, mitzvos v'chukim u'bechor. It talks about the various mitzvos and the laws. And Bechor, Rashi over here says, Korn kol ha'bechor ela shemaschil aser ta'aser. The point of the Gemara is you start all the way back by aser ta'aser. Lefi sheyesh ba'osa parsha mitzvos v'chukim harbe hanahukos b'chag ba'osa zman. We talk many mitzvahs that are relevant at that time of the year. Shuzman also, the time of the gathering of the crops. The Eis Shuanim Tzrichin Lesof Machol Beis, and the time the poor are gathering for their households. The Yod Yesh Bos a Parsha Mitzvahs Meiser Ani, Mitzvahs Noson Titen, Pasoach Tiftach, V'Hanik Tanik Levid Ivri, V'Shiluach Chavshi V'Ave Taviten. All of these mitzvahs that are relevant to poor people, to avodim, to slaves. So all of these various things we read that is all included in Kol HaBechor. Umaftir and Vayikachalo Shlomo. And the Haftorah over there, also from Sefer Malachim, talks about when Shlomo finished. This is also talking about by the finishing up of the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Vayikachalo Shlomo Hashem Bayom Hashmini Shilach Esa'am. It's talking about on the 8th day. We're holding here in Shmini Atzeres. On Shmini Atzeres, that was the day that Shlomo sent off the people after the end of the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash. And then the Gemara continues, L'machar, the next day, that's referring to what we call Simchas Torah, the final day of Sukkot, Korin V'zos HaBracha. We read from V'zos HaBracha, Umaftirin Vayamot Shlomo. And also here, we have a Haftorah from Sefer Malachim in the same basic area relevant to the building of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Huna Marav. Rav Huna says in the name of Rav, Shabbos Cholios B'chol Shel Moed. When Shabbos falls out on Chol Moed, Bein b'Pesach, bein b'Sukkos, whether we're talking about Shabbos Chol Moed of Pesach or whether Sukkos, Mikra Karinan Re'ayata, we read from the parsha of Re'ayata, that's in Sefer Shemos. Rashi says Sheyesha Mitzvah Shabbos Regolim V'chol Shel Moed. You have over there the mitzvahs of Shabbos, Regel, Chol Moed. It's actually from these psukim that we learn out the idea that it's also to do malacha on Chol HaMoed. So that's what we read in terms of reading from the Torah on Shabbos Chol HaMoed. Afture bepesach atzamos hayaveshas. Now on Pesach we do the Haftorah from the section of the dry bones that's in Sefer Yecheskel. Over Sukkos, and in Sukkos biyom bagog we read from Yecheskel also talking about the Milchemes Gog uMagog. Rashi over here says ba'atzamos hayaveshas sheyotzum mitzrayim lifnei haketz. Talking about the fact they'll leave Mitzrayim at the end days. That's what we read on Pesach time, Shabbos Chol HaMoed, B'Yom Bagog, and then when it's Chol HaMoed Sukkos, Shabbos Chol HaMoed Sukkos, we read Gog uMagog, V'Yah Milchama Hamur B'Zechariah. It's the same war that's mentioned in Zechariah. B'Hinei Yom Bo LaHashem. Behold, there will be a day that's going to come for Hashem. And the Brisa continues, B'Chanukah b'Nesiyim, on Chanukah we read from the Parshas Nesiyim, Parshas Naso, Umaftirin b'Neiros, and the Haftorah is Neiros, that refers to also a parak in Zechariah, b'Neiros to Zechariah, that's the parak Gimel of Zechariah. Rashi over here says, the Zechariah Rani v'Simchi al Shem Ra'isi v'hinei menorah zav kula, talks about a golden menorah relevant to Chanukah. And the Gemara continues, V'imikli shtei Shabbosos, if there are two Shabbos Chanukas, Kamaisa b'Neiros to Zechariah, then in the first one we read Neiros to Zechariah, and Basraisa, and then in the latter one, b'Neiros Shlomo, we read Neiros Shlomo. Rashi explains, Neiros to Shlomo, Vayas Chiram, that's Vayas Chiram, that's in Sefer Melachim, Ves HaMenoros Chamesh Miyamin. But Purim and on Purim, Vayavo Amalek, we read from the section of Vayavo Amalek, talk about Amalek on Purim. B'Rosh Chodashim and on Rosh Chodesh, U'Rosh Chodshechem, we read the section of Rosh Chodshechem from Sefer Bamidbar. Rosh Chodesh Echolios b'Shabbos. Now, if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, Maftirin, so then the Haftorah is V'Hoyim Midei Chodesh B'Chodsho, talks about the new month over there, that's in Sefer Yeshayahu. Cholios Be'echad b'Shabbos. Now, if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Sunday, so then Me'esmo, so then the day before, meaning on Shabbos, Maftirin Vayomer Lo Yehonasan Mocher Chodesh, so then we learn from Sefer Shmuel about Mocher Chodesh, tomorrow is the new moon. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Huna says, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video, on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis.